I wanted everyone to give a big JNUC welcome to the AOL team, Steve, Andrew, and Lisa.
Give these guys a second. All right, so you guys are at You've Got API. And I am Steve Colburn. I am the Director of Engineering and Operations for the Enterprise at AOL. And today you're going to be hearing from, well, they switched places on me, but Lisa Davies, Andrew Leininger. Unfortunately, Vince Webb was not able to make the trip, so these two have definitely agreed to pick up where his pieces are. Before we begin, though, I just want to give a quick update as to who AOL is today, because a lot of people still associate AOL to the CDs, or with Time Warner, or most frequently broadband, or I'm sorry, dial-up. So, but it is part of a history, but it's not who we are today. You see, in 2009, AOL spun out of Time Warner. And during that time, we pivoted our business model away from content and access and moved it toward media and advertising. And this is known internally as code and culture. Code being the pieces of technology that support the brands. Culture are the brands that our consumers use. This slide shows the investments that we have made internally as an organization between 2009 and 2015. In 2015, AOL was purchased by Verizon, which accelerated our investments into the code and culture business model. And as many of you may be aware, Verizon has entered a letter of intent with Yahoo, which we're not allowed to talk about today, but it is something that is possibly on the horizon. So the reason we're here today is because the enterprise is no longer giving the employee that one machine. The consumerization of IT has enabled technology to give employees solutions from all different directions. I'm certain a lot of your environments look very similar to this. For us, in 2009, we were nearly 100% a Windows shop in our environment. Today, we're 65% Mac. And the average employee has 3.5 devices connected to the enterprise. So for us, it's important that we get the right solution, able to support, it's fine, able to support the employees as well as support our back-end processes. And those back-end processes are tied very closely to the three areas here: legal hold, compliance, and asset management. And so in just a moment, you'll hear Lisa talk about how we leverage Jamf to do compliance and reporting for our asset management infrastructure, as well as pushing legal hold agents out to all the devices within our enterprise. And legal hold for us is that designation that we give to data and to employees that have been identified as having some type of relevance to litigation to or for the company. After that, you'll hear from Andrew. He'll talk about Jamf integration into Zendesk, how we automate trouble tickets for problematic machines in our environment. And then he'll talk about account cleanup, just good data hygiene in general, and how we use APIs on data hygiene. Lastly, he'll talk about how we use APIs through Jamf to give real-time updates for our asset management team to ensure that when we lock a machine, that it actually does what it says we're going to do. That way they can report back from a compliance standpoint. And then when we're done with the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session, and then afterwards we'll upload the deck for everyone's ability to look at the code. There's going to be a lot of code here, and we'll be happy to take questions at the very end. So without further ado, Lisa.
I'm going to start off talking about asset management integration. For this part, we're going to use the computer's resources within the JSS API. One of the objectives that we have is an external asset management system used by other tools. It'd be helpful for us to get this information into the JSS, things like the asset tag, who the assigned user is versus who's actually using it, the hardware status, is it stored, is it disposed? You'd be surprised how many disposed computers sometimes show back up. That way we can remove computers that might be disposed and inactive versus computers that have been offline, and we know which computers we need to follow up on and find out, hey, why are you offline? You're still meant to be installed in the fleet. To do this will allow us to search by asset tag, identify those, and it'll also give us one other benefit. We can identify those assets which are corporate owned versus perhaps personal, BYOD, or maybe rogue. To do this, we're going to use 3 extension attributes. The first one, the asset tag, is already there. We'll show you how to populate that. The second 2 is a string type and text fields, and they're going to be the assigned user and the hardware status. Once you get the basics of this, you can always add additional fields that are useful for you. Let's walk through our workflow here. So I've got a very basic algorithm right out. We're going to get a list of our users from, sorry, we're going to get a list of our serial numbers from the JSS. From this, we can build a query to run against our external asset management system and find which of those serial numbers it's familiar with. Then we'll run through a big loop. We'll validate any data we pull back about those computers so we're not writing rubbish up to our JSS to keep that neat. We'll format it and then finally put it all back into the JSS using curl. I'm a bit of a visual person, so I put a small flowchart here, same points again. So first step is we're going to get the serials. Secondly, we'll use those serials to query the asset management system. Then we're going to run through a loop. For each serial that's found in that asset management system, we'll validate any data we get back, create an XML file, and then finally write that XML file up to the JSS. So there's going to be a fair bit of code. Don't worry about writing it down. As all the guys have said, we're going to make this available. If you understand the process, we think that you can use these snippets later to put something together, keeping in mind you're also going to have to customize it for your own systems. Each of you are going to have a different system and a different backend you need to customize this for. So the first part here is we're actually just getting that list of serial numbers from the JSS and saving that into an array. When we do get that list of serial numbers, we need to do a validity check. I'm not sure about all of you, but sometimes I see computers come back with blank or invalid serial numbers after logic board replacements, and we don't want to try and query some bad string into our asset management system. Just trying to be a little bit tidy there. Once we have our list of serial numbers and we're confident with them, we can throw those into a query. In this particular system, it's an SQL query. Maybe you have a REST API. Maybe you have some other means to query that system. Once I have my query constructed, I'm then going to get the results. So I'm going to get back 4 columns. I'm going to get back serial number, asset tag, hardware status, and username. I'm going to pause briefly on the username field. This one's quite interesting. It allows you extra flexibility. For example, I like to log into my computer as Lisa, which is not exactly my corporate ID. This allows us to populate a corporate ID field for things that you might need to use a corporate ID for instead of the actual username the person is logging in as. So that gives you some more flexibility with other things you might do later on. Once I have each row, I'm going to validate it. In this particular example, I'm using a regular expression. You can use something else or validate that for the format that you're expecting. Now, there are going to be times when that data is incomplete. So if I get back a blank field or I get back something that doesn't make sense, I'm just going to write no data there so that I know that we successfully did the query, but I didn't get back the information I was expecting. Again, I don't want to write something that's bad into the JSS. Finally, once we have all that data, we need to format it into an XML file so that we can curl that up to the JSS. I'm using the variables there to fill in the values for the data I obtained from the external system. Once I've put it, I'm using a whole lot of temporary files. I remove the temporary file. When I finally complete it, I'm closing the database connection to the external system. So that's a bit of a whirlwind run-through of how to get your asset management data in. I think that will hopefully help you out, and it's going to be the building blocks for the next sections of our presentation. The next part I'm going to speak about is legal hold. We're going to take use of the users, user groups, computers, and computer groups. I wasn't actually familiar with what legal hold was until I had to look at this. Legal hold is very time sensitive. Sometimes when a person is identified as being placed on legal hold, it needs to be deployed straight away. And I didn't really want to have to be taking on-calls on the weekends or after hours to scope in a computer to legal hold deployment. I'm pretty sure you don't want it, and I know that he doesn't want that. So we had no choice but to automate it. So as mentioned, the scoping is user-based, whereas automatic triggers are typically computer-based. So that's a little bit of complexity there. We needed to be able to make use of the recurring check-in because we don't have the luxury of waiting for a user event to occur. I don't know next time someone's going to log in or open self-service. So to do this, we're matching computer extension attributes with user extension attributes to be able to do that scoping on a recurring check-in trigger. Let's walk through our preparation steps. So first of all, we're going to create the extension attributes. We're going to need computer extension attributes. We're going to need a user extension attribute, whether or not the person is on legal hold. Then we're going to need a user smart group. That smart group is going to have a list for us of all the users currently identified as being on legal hold. We're going to need a number of computer smart groups for our scoping and reporting. And then finally, we can create the policies. Once we've completed these steps, we're going to have a skeleton that's ready. And that's going to allow us to run a script, preferably on a cron job or some sort of scheduled task, depending on your platform, that keeps this data current. Again, with the asset management integration, you'd also want a cron job or something to run periodically to keep those records up to date. First of all, the extension attributes we're going to use is whether or not the assigned user is on legal hold. That's a computer extension attribute. And then whether or not the legal hold software is installed. The user extension attribute, a simple flag, whether or not the person is on legal hold. So let's create our smart groups. First of all, we need to create the smart groups for the policy scoping. Pretty simple, install and remove. Then we need to have the smart groups that we'll use to build that scoping. Whether or not legal hold is installed, is it not installed, is it required, not required, and the really simple one is the user smart group, yes or no. Are they on legal hold? For our policy scoping, legal hold install would be a status of legal hold is required and is not currently installed. For the remove, the inverse, legal hold is installed and it is not required. There's your policy scoping part done. Let's go through the algorithm that we'll use. So first of all, we're going to obtain a list of users from the JSS that it already knows about who are currently on legal hold. We're going to obtain a list from our external system. Now, there's going to be a number of duplicates, but there's also going to be some in that list that aren't there. Remember that external system is going to have Windows users, Android users, some users that our JSS isn't even worried about. So we're going to combine those two lists and remove the duplicates. Then what we're going to do is run through a big loop. We're going to check each username in that list. If it's on to on, we don't need to do anything. If it's off to on, then we're going to turn it on and we're going to update their computers, get that software installed. If they're really lucky and they're fallen off legal hold, let's get it off their computers. It's no longer needed. Then finally, we're going to pull a list of every computer that has legal hold installed and verify that it's still meant to be there. This is in case a computer has changed hands and it's gone to somebody else who is not required to have legal hold. Again, I'm a visual person, so we'll walk through the flowchart. First of all, we'll get our user list. We'll compare that list with the external system and remove all our duplicates. Then we're going to run through our loop for every user in that list. We'll check their status. If they're still on legal hold, there's not much to do. If they're new to legal hold, let's get it installed. If they've been removed from legal hold, let's get it off their system as fast as we can. Finally, at the end, we're going to get a list of all the computers. We're going to check the computer statuses and update any that are able to have legal hold removed. So again, with the code, please look at it later. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. I know that there's a lot to take in, but these snippets should be enough to get you going. And if you see us during the time here, you're welcome to ask us questions. So I'm going to pull from the JSS a list of all the users identified as being on legal hold. I'm going to save that into an array, existing legal hold members. I'm also going to query our external system. I don't have that code there. That's very specific to us. You'll all have your own way to get that. It might be a database query, a REST API. Maybe you get a static list that gets updated manually. I hope you don't, but whatever way you do, get those names into an array, and we'll call that new legal hold members. I've used Perl here, and I've used the unique function there to get rid of all my duplicates. So when we're working with the JSS, it is able to update users based on user ID, whereas I like to work with usernames. So in this little snippet here, I'm building a hash table which maps all of the usernames to their JSS IDs, which I can refer to later to update those users. So this is the main bulk of the code that runs through in a continual loop, which is to check their status, update their status if required. There's a few sub-functions here. One is to update the user computers and update the user. So updating the user computers, after it's found out that a computer needs to be it goes through and identifies from the user all of the computers that that person has, because a number of people are going to have more than one device, and it will set that extension attribute to on for their assigned computers. Updating their user, we're going to use that JSS ID, and we're going to write up the XML file, and we're going to set their ID to have legal hold required. Then finally, we have update computer, which was a sub-function of one of those other functions, which updates each of the computers that the user has. So we can set the value to either yes or no, whether or not the legal hold is on or off. Finally, once we have finished that by updating it, we need to get that smart group. So we've got here the ID of the smart group for legal hold software is installed. We're going to iterate through that loop and check that the assigned user is still on legal hold. If they're not on legal hold, then we're going to remove that, and they'll fall into the remove scoping. I'm going to pass over to Andrew. He's got some really excellent tips on integration with Zendesk and automation.
So our help desk team uses Zendesk for their ticket work. And we have found that we need to write automation that ties the JSS API with the Zendesk API in certain cases. To illustrate the case where we don't do this, it's kind of sort of what we take for granted as a normal operation of the JSS. So, for example, if we're given a security requirement where we have to have the firewall turned on our whole Mac fleet, that's something that we can do multiple ways through the JSS. We can deploy that. We can track the status of it. If computers fall out of compliance, we can remediate that. That's just all done automatically. We don't need to have our help desk call up each employee and say, today we're going to work through turning on the firewall on your computer. So that's the bulk of what we do most of the time with the JSS. But there are times we found where maybe we can report on a compliance state or a best practice, but we can't actually implement it or remediate. And we need the help of our help desk teams to work with the user to get something done. A couple examples here. We'd like to have our whole fleet upgrade to Sierra, but we know that there's some people using some old computers that won't run it. And our help desk just does a better job of managing that whole process with the user. They'll call them, they'll explain the situation, they'll help them make a backup, help them order a new computer, and then when a new computer arrives, help them restore data to it. So that's a task that's better handled by the help desk. Another example is we're given a requirement that says that the system integrity protection needs to be enabled on the whole fleet. Just by upgrading to 10.11 or newer, we get that, but users can disable it. And then the process of getting that re-enabled is involved. So it works better where we have help desk technicians reach out to the user, hopefully figure out why they disabled it, and then help them get that re-enabled. So while we may not be able to automate some of these tasks with the JSS directly, we can actually automate the ticket lifecycle. So we recover the chance to automate there a little bit. This is fairly straightforward. We just sort of build smart groups with the criteria that we need to take action on, and then use the API to get all of the member computers that are in those smart groups. What we get from that is JSS IDs and serial numbers and some information, but we need kind of the full bulk detail for each computer. So we save the identifiers we get from the smart group and then use the API again to go fetch each of those individual members. And now we can get out the data that we need that we'll use to send a message to Zendesk, which will create a ticket for the right person with the right detail for the right computer and assigned to the right user. So the little code snippets that show this off, first step, get all the users that are in a group we've created, save those results out to a file, and then we'll work through that file looking for an identifier, so a serial number. And now we've got our list of serial numbers that we need to work on, so we'll work through each of those. And in this simple case, we're just pulling out an asset tag. That's basically the one thing that we wouldn't get just from the group list. So we get the whatever information we need to save for that computer, we'll get it out, and now we've got something that we're ready to post over to Zendesk. So we can send Zendesk a message like this that it'll consume and make a new ticket. Next task that we used to do operationally, manually, we've used the API to automate, is keeping the user accounts records in the JSS cleaned up. Yeah, this is something that we used to have a monthly or weekly task where we'd go into the web app, go to the users list, get all the users, sort by computer count. If they had 0 computers, just click on them and delete them. So we don't want to do that anymore. Just to back up a little bit, because of our asset management integration, we're reading in data for each computer and their assigned user. We're importing that into the JSS. And so we've got user accounts coming in, and we've kind of got a continuous flow of new employees joining the team, and we're saying goodbye to people that are moving on. So the user list is kind of always changing. So we like to make sure that user list reflects only users who actually have computers assigned to them. So that's kind of the point of this, is to just sort of keep that cleaned up. And this is pretty simple. Again, so the same pattern here where we ask the JSS by the API for all the users, and then we keep track of each user ID that comes across so that we can go back and retrieve that individual user and look at all the full data for it. But the thing we're interested in here is the list of computers assigned. If we find a user that doesn't have any computers assigned, we'll save that aside. Then we'll ask the JSF to delete all those. So the snippets here that kind of show that off again. First step, get all the users, then loop through, they request each one, and look for an empty set of computers, and remember all of those, and then for those that we found that didn't have any computer, we'll delete them. So the last item, I want to show you the report we've got that shows the status of the device lock command. So our asset management team, they use the MDM device lock feature of the JSS to do physical asset management. So that's where an employee might report that they've lost or someone's stolen their laptop. Or if I'm a remote employee and I get a new computer, I've got to ship my old one back and get the new one shipped to me. In these cases, our asset management team will use the JSS to lock those devices. So they started using it for this purpose, and then they wanted a way to a report in the JSS so they could log in and they could see all the computers that they had sent the device lock command to. So they wanted something like this where they could click a link and see the status of everything that they had worked on. We got looking into making that for them, and we did not find any way to make a list like this where there's computer names and status with the parts of the JSS that are already available for building smart groups and save searches. There wasn't any criteria readily available for this to make a list like this. So this is where we went to Jamf and asked for help, and they came back with a solution that we've got running, which is working great. But there's a couple things that stood out about their solution here. One is that you can get this data in bulk from the API. You can ask for the computer commands resource, and you can get all the computer commands for a particular name, device lock in our case, but you can get all of them that have been sent. And the other cool thing that emerged from this is that if you make a new extension attribute for each computer, you can actually now take this data out of the JSS from the API, and you can write it back into the JSS to each computer on a new extension attribute, which then gives you something that you can build a smart search or a safe search or a smart group from. So the way this works is you start off with a extension attribute that you just, basically it's just a placeholder, and then use the API to get all the device lock computer commands that have been sent, save the IDs. And the same pattern here, you go get the whole list and then you go get each individual item. So when you get each individual device lock command, a couple things are useful. One is you'll get a APNS result status and the computer ID that was sent to. So now we can, using that computer ID, we can write to a new extension attribute for it, and we can send it the text that's in the APNS result status. And snippets here, so this is the preamble for this, where we tell this script which extension attribute we're using and set up the text that will appear in the report that they'll use. So again, first step is get all the computer commands, get all the device lock computer commands, and save the IDs. And then we can go and request each individual device lock command. And the interesting thing that's available here is this APNS result status and the computer that it was applied to. So we save those two bits of information again, and then prepare the, based on the APNS result status, prepare the return, the text that'll show up in the report. And now we've got we can post a new extension attribute back to each individual computer. And so now we've got a criteria that's available on the computers where we can use to make safe searches and smart groups. And that's it.
Very cool, thank you. Again, if you want to send in questions, the hashtag that we're using is JNUC 2016 API. And I'll be monitoring those as we go. First question for either of you, do you have any best practices to recommend when you're developing scripts like this using the API? How do you do your your build and your testing and handling things like edge cases?
I'll take the first part and then I'm going to give you a go.
Okay.
We have 3 environments: a production environment, a dev environment, and a UAT environment. Our production environment is many thousands of computers. Our UAT environment, we usually try out your beta builds, thank you. And our dev environment is a small environment that we test out our policies. Our UAT environment has a few thousand computers in it, so it's a great playpen for running the API so that we don't write bad data back into our production. Your turn.
And then just developing locally and then testing on the dev system next.
Awesome, good advice. Don't test in production. Yes. There's another question, which actually it sounds like it might actually turn into a feature request, but do you do anything with limiting which IP ranges or which devices are able to talk to your JSS API? So do you restrict that network traffic, or is it just secured through username and password?
It's not on our public facing, right? We've taken out of there.
We have a bit of a complex infrastructure. We're behind firewalls and load balancers. So the API is also disabled on some of the nodes. And we're doing it that way, but I agree, we could probably write up a good feature request with suggestion.
Don Montalvo is linked to one already, so I don't know where Don is, but he's got one if you look at the Twitter stream right now. Believe it or not, those are all the questions that came in on Twitter. Are there others in the room? If you put your hand up, I'll do my best to repeat the question up there. Actually, I'll just run.
Just wondering, do you guys actually post data to JSS to static computer groups at all, or do you just rely on extension attributes and then scope this smart computer groups from that?
I think mostly we use extension attributes. Sorry, I didn't catch the very first part of that. Sorry.
So just wondering whether you post to the JSS, do you update any static computer groups at all? So you were syncing your group from Active Directory to the JSS and you wanted to keep those groups in sync?
Actually, I think there have been situations where we have done that. Nothing that we've presented, I think, involves that, but yeah, that does sound familiar, where I've created a static group based on reading in some, like a text file of names and then using the API to populate that into a static group.
And Lisa reminded us that she brought a nice stack of notebooks. So if you asked a question, even if you asked it on Twitter, you get a notebook as well on your way out. Another question came out on Twitter. How is the legal hold process triggered? Is that a Zendesk ticket or some other system?
That is an HR. I'm going to let you take that one.
Yeah, so in our environment, we actually have legal that notifies us, and there's a switch that we flip that the people in legal have the ability to go in and put somebody on legal hold. And the reason is just for the anonymity of it. There are certain people that you can have public legal hold and you can have private legal hold. And so you want to make sure that you have the people that need the ability that actually have that flexibility to turn it on and off, as Lisa had mentioned in her part. So what we do is we just have an interface for them to go in, turn it on, which triggers everything else in the environment.
Follow-up to that, is that interface in Active Directory, or do you just have like a separate user account in your JSS where they can only do like some certain static group these people can be on legal hold? What was like the exact trigger?
It's a security group in Active Directory.
Okay, thank you.
One other question came in on Twitter here. With the legal hold workflow, is the script running on a dedicated server, or where is that running, and how frequently does that have to run?
Sure. We use an every hour trigger, so we hope to have it deployed within an hour, or not much after. It's a cron job that runs repeatedly, so within an hour you'd have it installed if you fell into that requirement.
Yep.
The script just runs over and over again. It's pretty quick, very lightweight.
Those in the room? Yeah. What do you run that script on?
Our infrastructure is currently Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
So it's running on the server, not client?
It does not run client side, it's all server side.
Question in the front here.
What are you doing to secure the credentials that you guys use to interact with the API? Oh, well, you mentioned it's server side. Never mind. Bad question.
But, well, that still don't want to have
Still a good
those
question.
credentials saved there, so that's something we need to work better at.
All right, I've got one more here. Is there a way from the API to get a single extension attribute for all computers in one GET request? Or do you need to do that through a loop?
Like if it were JSS resource / extension attributes, presumably, if I'm thinking of that right?
Yes.
Actually, I don't. That's a good question. I actually don't know if that exists.
Okay.
I don't
Good question.
think so, but I'd have to look at the documentation. Awesome question. You got us.
And it might
Everybody knows, yeah, that'd
also
be
might
great.
be a future request. Yeah, Mike.
How many API accounts do you need for an infrastructure of your size, and how do you manage the passwords and keys for them?
We have a few different accounts for different groups. So IT security are also doing some work with the API. Our team do some work with the API. Asset management do some work. They all have unique accounts with passwords that we wouldn't even be able to type if we tried.
It sounds like you guys have a pretty large infrastructure. I was just wondering, are you guys utilizing sites at all? If so, does it cross sites, or is it restricted? Can you restrict it to just once?
So let me repeat that. So the question was, in your large environment, are you using sites within the JSS, or is it all within one site?
Yeah, we actually don't use sites.
We're actually a really small team.
Yeah, if anybody knows if it does, though, I'd be interested to hear.
Any final questions? Going once, going twice. Oh, there it is.
Thank you. How much of your time as a percentage of a project like that did you spend on modeling out the API locally? And how much do you think it would benefit you if Jamf were to publish like a library that would have that all modeled out already?
Good question. It would have given me less code to write for the portions I did. I actually enjoyed writing some of that code. It did take a fair bit of working out how to get all the values that I needed from the external systems. I think the hardest part was interpreting those systems and getting access, and where do I go to get that. Once I had that, it came together, and then a lot of practice runs in the UAT environment. I was so scared that I'd do a bad run in the prod environment, so I took a backup before I did the very first run. And of course, follow your change management rules. If you're going to be doing a massive data update, put in a change management request so that if something does go wrong, you can restore that backup you took before the first run. Hasn't happened, but it's scary.
So the question was, is it possible to get the lock code that you set when you lock a computer via the API?
Yeah, when we did that, it wasn't. You still had to go to the computer inventory record to see that value.
Another great feature request. Could be yours on Jamf Nation. All right, any other questions? Let's give a big JNUC thank you to the AOL team.